Okay, so we're going to work through these three main parts as we go through activity 3.1. And then I want you to pause after each part. Okay, so we're going to start with I want to point out that this is page 34 in your book. And the first concept that we're going to get into is this concept of understanding the area of a square. Okay, so that's our first kind of big thing. So on page 34, looking at the try these be, I'm going to jump down to this visual. So if we have a square right here, everything I write, you write. So the square, our area that we already talked about, is one side times the other side. Because in a square, these are all the same. So we could write S just to represent side. And all the sides are equal in a square. So if we think about that, if we go back up to this picture right here, if this side is 4 centimeters, then this side is 4 centimeters. And if we're calculating the area of a square, we would have 4 centimeters times 4 centimeters. And now I'm going to take a look at just my numbers. So 4 times 4 equals 16. Then I'm going to take a look at my units. Centimeters times centimeters gives me centimeters squared, and that 2 is because there's 2 dimensions. Okay, so here my area equals side times side, so I could write that as side squared, again because there's 2 dimensions. So now I'm going to scroll down to letter A, and within letter A, I'm going to try to go ahead and complete this table. So if I'm looking at this right here, my calculation, if I have an area where this side was 6, let's say, so my side is 6, I would find the area of that square by saying 6 times 6, and it's always in feet. So 6 times 6 equals 36, and my unit would be feet squared. I want you to try 8 and try 11. You don't have to try those two, but if you want to try some more complicated work, you are welcome to try those two. But go ahead right now, I want you to hit pause on the video, and I want you to try 8 and 11, and then come back and check your work. All right, so this is what you should have after doing it. You should have gotten 64 feet squared, and the units are important, and 121 feet squared. Okay, great. So we just talked about understanding the area of a square. So the area of a square equals that side squared. If you have a question, make sure you raise your hand as we go through this. So now I want to get into part 2. So the second thing that we need to talk about today is using exponents, understanding this term exponents, and squaring a number. So to get into that, I want to turn to page 35. So an exponent tells us how many times the number is times itself. So we're going to just look straight at try these C. So within the exponent, I have 12. That's what I'm going to call my base. Okay, so 12 is my base. I got that 12 because it's the number right there. And that 12 is 1, 2. So there are 2 12s. And that 2 right there is what I'm going to call the power. So this whole thing right here, the 12 and the 2, that is written in exponential form. So the base with the power, that whole thing is written in exponential form. Okay? So we're going to do this one more time. So if I'm looking at the next question, my base would be 1/3. Okay, so that's what is going to be my base. And I have 1, 2. If this were a square and this were 1/3, this would also be 1/3. So my area right there would be 1/3 times 1/3, so it would be 1/3 squared. And we call it squared because it's in the shape of the square. So that 2 right there, that's my power. Now, I want to clarify here. When you write this, it is correct to write it using what we call a subscript. So I have my 1/3, that's a big regular whole number, and my square is this little tiny 2. And I can put parentheses around it just to keep it organized. That is the correct way to do it. The incorrect way to do it, or the wrong way to do it, would be 1/3 with like this 2. Okay, that is the wrong or the incorrect way to do it. I want you to go ahead and I want you to try to do this one right here. Try to do it on your own. And then when you're ready, push play and we will check your answer. Okay, so you should have this right here. And again, if you want to put parentheses just to make it look different, you can. With or without the parentheses, it's fine. The parentheses aren't necessary, but they're fine. Just make sure that you have a little 2, and this right here, this is your base. And make sure you know that that 2 right there, that is your power, or we will also call that the exponent. Okay? So now going down to this table here, now it's given to you in exponential form. So you have the little 2. You're going to write that with the base. So your base is 5. That little 2 means 5 times 5. And then standard form is just the number. So 5 times 5 is 25. So that works out. So we're going to do this next one. 2 squared is how I would read that. So that works out to 2 times 2, and that equals 2 times 2 is 4. So my standard number would be 4. I want you to go ahead and try this one and that one. Don't worry about that last one right there, but go ahead and try those other 2. Make sure that you hit pause and that you actually do them. Okay, so make sure you hit pause and that you actually do them, and then hit play and you can check your answers. All right, so here is what you should have. So you should have 1 times 1 is 1, and 7 times 7 is 49. Sorry, my 49 looks a little wonky. All right, so now, just going back to this, understand that using exponents, so remember you have the number, and then this little number right here, that's your exponent or your power. Okay, we use those, they mean the same thing. So for example, in this here, if 2 is my number, then my exponent is 2. And squaring of a number. When we have a 2, that is what we call squaring the number, because a square has 2 dimensions. So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 squared is 4. Same thing here. If I had this, if I had a square and this was 6 and this was 6, I could say 6 squared, that little 2 means squared, equals 36, because it is 2 dimensions and it looks like a square. I could not say that is not read as 6 squared. Okay, that would be what we call 6 to the power of 3 is how we would read that. Okay, we do not say 6 squared. That is 6 to the power of 3. So squaring a number means that number with a square, with a 2. That's what your squaring the number means. All right, and the third part of this, now we need to understand what we call square roots. Okay, so for example, if I gave 36 and I said this area right here is 36 feet squared, and I wanted to know what this side is, that's what we consider a square root. when I'm working backwards. Okay, so when I'm working backwards, that's what we call a square root. So here, page 36, I have my area right in there is 36 feet squared. I want to know what is the length of this side. Okay, so I want to know what times what equals 36. Okay, or what side length times what side length equals 36. I could also write that as s squared equals 36. To solve that, I'm going to use what we call a radical symbol. I'm going to put 36 in there, and I know that 6 times 6 equals 36. So that square root of 36 equals 6. Okay? So here, find each square root. So the square root of 16, it just asked me to work backwards. What times what would equal 16? So in your head, you should know, or according to the multiplication chart, you should know that 4 times 4 equals 16. So the square root, or what we use here, the square root of this number would be 4. Okay, same here. What times what equals 81? Well, what number goes in there? Look at your multiplication chart. It should be 9. Okay, 9 times 9 equals 81. So the square root of 81 is 9 squared. Go ahead right now, hit pause, and I want you to try letter C. Figure out what the square root is. That square root is 9. Figure out what the square root is of letter C. Hit pause, and when you come back, go ahead and check it. If you have 10, you are correct. Okay, if you have 10, you are correct. Great job. All right, so now we're going to take a look at this. So the x squared equals 64. We're on page 37. I want you, just for the sake of time, go ahead and skip this. If you want to, you can do that if you have extra time, but go ahead and skip it. All right, so now for these, it says solve each equation. So x squared equals 64. I recognize that that's something times something equals 64. I could also write that as the square root of 64 equals what? So I know that 8 times 8 is 64, so therefore the square root of 64 is 8. That's my answer for letter A. I want you to go ahead again and hit pause, and I want you to try letter B. Don't worry about letter C. If you feel up to it, go ahead and try it, but just try letter B for right now. All right, if you had that x equals 11, you are correct, because we know that 11 times 11 equals 121. Okay, so now your next thing right here, I have given you the notes. I want you to summarize those notes. Okay, actually, I want you to highlight important vocabulary, and then I want you to summarize those notes in your composition book. Sorry, I'm changing this. Glue them in. Make sure you glue them in. Then highlight important vocab, then summarize those notes in the composition book. Please ask questions if you don't understand. Okay, raise your hand and ask. Great.